Swedish law on rape is about to be changed. So what? That's happened before, even in recent years. Anything special this time? Or is it just another cosmetic adjustment? No, this time is special. Most of us have heard the expression, no means no. Well, the present Swedish law on rape doesn't even state that a no is enough. Only if special means, threat or violence, or a particularly vulnerable situation can be shown, a sexual assault constitutes a rape. But victims are often in a stage of frozen fright, so no violence or threat is needed. Out of some 6,000 reports of sexual assault a year, only about 200 lead to conviction. This new law relies on the revolutionary idea that sex should be consensual. A yes means yes, if you will. The idea that consent in words or deeds is required when you want to have sex with somebody. This sounds to me, and I think to most people, as a perfectly adequate demand that should be spelled out in law. I have called for a change to a consent-based law for many years now, together with many others, in recent years with the fabulous young people of the FATA organization. Until now, these efforts have met opposition by politicians and, not least, by lawyers, with arguments that have been so biased and illogical that, as an old professor of law, I have been amazed. I'm genuinely happy to live to see this happen. The die-hard resistance hasn't only surprised me, but it has also convinced me that the law on rape has to be reshaped. Sexual integrity needs legal protection based on current knowledge, not on yesterday's ideas of how men and women should behave. Remember when Neil Armstrong stepped out of the lunar module that day in July 1969 and stepped onto the moon? A small step for a man, a giant leap for mankind, Armstrong said. Well, a giant leap for mankind, at least for the part of it here in Sweden, it'll mean when we change our rape law to a consent-based law. A law stating that sex without consent constitutes a criminal offense. Now, isn't that exaggerating it a little? No, not at all. It's a rethinking of the whole issue of sexual behavior. It will, I am convinced, have a strong impact on attitudes, as had the law forbidding the use of violence in the upbringing of children in the late 1970s. I think I understand now why it's been so difficult to reform our sex law. The conceptions of how men and women act when it comes to sex and what responsibility men and women have in that area are deeply anchored in most of us, men and women, young and old. Our present law mirrors these conceptions, as did previous Swedish laws, and the same goes for other countries. To propose a law that goes against those kinds of conceptions is bound to fail, according to all logic. We tend to just know how things are. We don't have any doubts, and we don't really care what research might show or what real life might reveal. You don't have to go back to the Bible, where Eve took a bite of the apple and thus led Adam and mankind into sin. Going back to the time of our great-grandparents will do. Some time ago, I watched a TV program about a Swedish actress who got professional help to find her ancestors. One of the women that was found in old documents was a maid who had served on a farm where the employer had made her pregnant. She gave birth alone in a cabin in the woods, and she cut off the umbilical cord and she choked the baby with her brown underskirt. She was caught by the police, found guilty of infanticide, and sentenced to 2 years of hard labor. She served it in solitary confinement in a prison full of women convicted of the same crime. What about the man? He who, we must assume, had used the woman for his own pleasure. He who seemingly took no responsibility for the consequences of his actions. No shadow fell upon him, nor did any shadow fall upon any of the other men who had destroyed the lives of her fellow prisoners. They went on with their lives, and nobody even thought of making them responsible for what they had done. In essence, the outlook that has guided mankind is this: the woman is responsible for what happens during and as a consequence of sex. The law that will be enforced in Sweden means a radical change of this basic notion. The simple but revolutionary new impact of the law is this: every adult individual bears the full responsibility for what he or she does when it comes to sex. It means a fundamental switch from a legal position that, in fact, accepted the superiority of the physically stronger over the physically weaker. May the weaker be a woman, a child, or another man. We live in a century that in many respects has reached far from the stage of primitivity. Well, we do have terrible conflicts going on in many parts of the world, but we claim to have realized, and we have stated in numerous documents, that all human beings are of the same value, regardless of ethnic background, etc. Apartheid in South Africa was globally and successfully fought. But women are to this day a suppressed category in many parts of the world. They are treated as second-class citizens. We do not combat that suppression with sanctions, as we and many other countries did apartheid. And in Sweden, known as one of the world's most gender-equal countries, there has been this hard resistance against letting the lack of consent constitute a rape. Well, it can seem that there's much to lose for men with such a law. The right to exert their sexual so-called needs at their own pleasure. The right not to have to take responsibility. The right to display their maleness without regard to individuals incapable of resisting them physically. The right to disregard the possibility to cause a pregnancy. The right to disregard the consequences of that, to let the woman subject herself to an abortion. That is, if she lives in a country such as Sweden, where abortions are legal, and not in many of the other countries where she would have to commit a crime and be punished. In short, the right for a man to have a woman bear the consequences of his unprotected abuse of her body. Just like that maid had to bear the consequences of her employer's abuse of power, she who killed her baby in despair and was sentenced to hard labor. But a consent-based law will, I am convinced, be for the better for all. It'll guide young people to sex without misuse of power, help them not to cause harm, show them how sex can give their lives new deep dimensions, and make them responsible and loving parents to children that are the result of love. Of course, laws can be violated. Of course, there will be cases of sexual assault in Sweden, even with a consent-based law. Of course, there will be cases where the perpetrator is acquitted due to lack of evidence. But without such a law, it's often not even possible to take action against the perpetrator. Without such a law, the state, in practice, acknowledges the right of the physically stronger. So, to all men who until now have not accepted such limits, and to the vast majority of men who themselves have never committed sexual abuse, and to women who might have been inclined to blame the victim and excuse the perpetrator, I say this: it's time to climb out of the lunar module and show your approval of this statement of the fundamental right of sexual integrity. This is no small step. We all take a giant leap into a new, better world. Thank you.